Hello again, I'm Posh Spice, and welcome back to the Academy of Imperfection, a place where expert lecturers share their wisdom on the subject of imperfection. In today's class, the extraordinary Kemi Nekvapil teaches us some life-changing lessons from her new book, Power. Lessons on presence, owning your story, and living a full life without apology.
You know, I think we've all been given unsolicited advice from family and friends. And what happens for the giver of the advice is that we have this kind of ego state of, you just need to do what I tell you to do and then life is going to be fine because that worked for me. And then it leaves the person that receives the advice thinking, well, if I don't do that, then somehow I'm failing.
So polish off that jar of Marmite and join students Hugh, Ryan and Josh in the Academy of Imperfection.
It's an exciting day.
It is an exciting day.
It is. We've had about 15 minutes chat before this, and I can't tell you how excited I am. We're very lucky to have you here. Kemi Nekvapil. We had a 5-minute conversation about your name.
Yeah.
And
you
name.
still decided not to read it as you said it. like as if, like, what a flex.
Confidence.
Like,
Confidence.
Yeah, coming out with confidence. Exactly.
Kemi, it is so exciting to have you here. Just your background very quickly. Kemi is a life coach, author, speaker, and Dare to Lead facilitator, which is the program you do through Brené Brown or with Brené Brown. Born in England with a Nigerian heritage, Kemi spent her entire childhood in the foster care system where she got familiar with the feelings of fear, vulnerability, and powerlessness. As a coach, Kemi supports women to own their voices, to celebrate their successes, and to find their purpose. I feel like this is going to be a really important conversation for us to be having. So welcome to the Imperfects.
It's an absolute delight to be here. I love your work, all of you.
Thank you for the jam.
Oh, yeah.
Who doesn't need jam?
So Kemi has brought in a gift for us, and it is plum, cardamom, and vanilla jam.
It's huge. I mean, this can't go badly. I mean, what a start. What a start. Thank you, Kemi. I feel like I just want to get 4 spoons.
I want to smell it. That's my main.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to smelling it. But not now, but we will later. Anyway.
That's a very intimate look into your life. I just want to smell it. Okay, Hugh.
The cameras are rolling. It can all be.
Now, Kemi, I was just saying before that when your name came up to come on the podcast, it reminded me of, before we get into your story and so raw food is such a big part of what you used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, like, years ago when I was trying to find recipes on raw food, because the girl I was going out with, she was vegan and gluten-free and a bunch of different things. And you're the person, I looked at your recipes on your website, on your raw food stuff. So thank you for that.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. I hope that's not the reason why you're no longer with your girlfriend.
It is. It is the reason. It is the sole reason.
It was the carrot soup recipe, wasn't it?
I spent all day making this food, and then she took one look at it. We'd been going out for 9 years. She took one look at it, looked at me, and she said, "Do not tell me this is from Kemi Nekvapil's website." And I said, "Unfortunately, it is." And that was it. Yeah, couldn't come back from that.
9 years down the drain.
Down the drain.
Yeah, it was. I trained as a baker and worked as a chef for nearly 20 years. And so I love food. I adore food. Yeah. And when I was doing the raw food thing, it was very much about how do you add energy to your life so it fuels you to do the things that you want.
Love it.
Yeah.
But because the conversation for women and food is always about how much do you weigh or how much can you lose, I just realised after a certain time that message was kind of infiltrating into what I was doing. And then I just thought, okay, it's time for me to step out of this space because it's been taken over by that message. And I was now starting to spend time with women and realising, wow, I'm having women ask me what has less calories in it, cucumber or celery. And first of all, I found it amusing. And then I actually got really angry about it because I realised, wow, we have been convinced that our worth literally comes from our dress size. And what if a woman never loses this 5 kilos? Then what happens? So she didn't achieve her life's goal. And so for me, it started to look at how can I contribute in a way that is about women living their lives fully, regardless of what we look like and how much we weigh.
Incredible.
I feel like we could do a whole episode on that. That's really great stuff. I mean, before we get into today's chat, I think it would be lovely to give the listeners your sort of background, your story, I guess.
Yep.
I know it's a big part of when you've written a book called Power, and it's and a big part of that is owning a story. So if you'd be happy to share your story.
Yeah, I'm very happy to share my story. So, I mean, I think like with all of us, our stories kind of come before we do in a way. So and what I mean by that is that I was born in 1970s England to Nigerian parents at a time when the English had, colonized Nigeria. And middle-class Nigerian parents very much believed the best thing they could do for their children was to send them to England for an English education. Now, there was no government systems or processes in place here. It was literally Nigerian parents finding there were magazines, I can't remember what they were called, that literally had pictures of beautiful black babies and how many siblings there were, and then white families would just pick the children that they wanted. Some of those children just got lost. They would land with these parents, and then their Nigerian parents would come back to find them, and they'd gone. So they were either in abusive situations or they were homeless on the street.
Oh, God.
And so in some ways, I have gratitude that didn't turn out to be my story. I had 5 primary foster carers, including my birth mother, who I'd see in the holidays. And it's so interesting. I feel that I really have to give the context of me being fostered, because I had a very good friend many, many years ago. We'd been friends for about 5 years, and we were chatting one day, and she said, must have been really hard with parents as crack addicts. And I went, what? And she said, because you were fostered. I said, what's that got nothing to do with crack? There's no crack involved.
Yeah.
And then I realised that if we don't actually share our stories, people will make them up.
Yeah.
Very
You
true.
know? So
Based
she
on
had
their
just
own
assumed,
assumptions.
she had just
Yeah.
assumed, well, if you're fostered, that means that your parents must have been drug addicts, you know? And so I realised, I need to start sharing this from actually my parents made the decision that they thought would be the best for them. And the idea was that, us Nigerian children that were fostered in the 1960s and 70s, there were tens of thousands of us. There's actually a film, I can't remember the director's name, it's actually called Farming. And it tells the story of, this one particular boy in England who was fostered out to white families and kind of his story, which goes off in a way that you could not ever imagine. But it's about his constant search for belonging. And so I was fostered with 5 primary carers. Some I was absolutely loved, and that there was no doubt about that, especially my first foster parents and my last foster parent. So I think that kind of bookended some not so great carers in the middle. And I'm very grateful, especially for my first foster parents, Mummy Olive and Daddy Brian. I still call them Mummy Olive and Daddy Brian. And I always will. And I called my guitar Olive because they were the people that indoctrinated me into country and Western music. And so I just had that sense of family. We had family meals every single night without the television on. They had a kitchen garden. We'd pick berries in the summer. I was brought up in Kent, which is England's country garden, which is where my gardening
It sounds so
obsession.
picturesque.
Look, in some ways, I mean, in terms of being connected to the outside and being connected to people, it kind of was. And I think that's why, for me, it was so traumatic to be moved from them. And I was moved from them. There was no kind of system. There was no kind of slow removal or we'll let you know. It was very much, for whatever reasons, the situations were no longer tenable. And it was normally just a case of finances, what my birth mother, the Nigerian currency compared to the English pound. And so we had to be moved on. And although I know the reason that I can form relationships with people is because of that relationship I had in that first home, leaving that first home was one of the most traumatic experiences I've ever had.
So how old were you when you left that
This
home?
is the thing about being fostered. So I can only give rough ideas.
Yeah, right.
So people always say to me, so where were you? And I always have to think, what foster parent was I with? Roughly how old was I?
Okay.
So I think I was around 6 or 7. And what happened was that I had gone on holiday with my younger sister to America with my birth mum. And it was the first time we'd had McDonald's. And I remember having a strawberry milkshake, and it was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to me.
That's what led you to raw food.
That's what led me to, yeah, exactly. This just needs a little bit of spinach in here. And then when we came back from the holiday, we didn't go back to my first foster parents. And I remember sitting in this strange house and just having this moment of kind of realizing something was happening, but I didn't know what it was. I was a young child. And I must have done something because I started crying. And my birth mother let me know through a look or through words, enough of that. And then she said, this is your new mum and dad. And I remember in that moment just knowing I couldn't cry. And I knew that I couldn't say to my new mum and dad that I kind of wanted to go back to my old mum and dad. And I would spend every night crying myself to sleep, trying to work out as a 6-year-old how I could get back to that ever house. But I had no idea where it was. I was 6 or 7. Had no idea how to get back there. And it was in that moment that I kind of realised that it wasn't okay for me to have feelings, that I had to make sure that no one around me was upset by any experience that I was having. And that foster home was actually the home that was quite emotionally abusive, in that there was always the threat of, if you're not good, if you're not this, if you're not that, we'll send you back to Nigeria. And that Nigeria had also been demonized by that family too. So that was like the ultimate punishment, to be sent back to Nigeria. And so I just learned from there to be very good and very quiet and have no feelings and just get on with it.
Wow.
Jeez. And so what happened with from that family?
Yes.
How long were you there for?
About 6 or 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And then they got too old to look after us. They were kind of in their 60s and we were becoming teenagers, sort of 11, 12. So then we were moved again, and we were moved to actually what was the worst foster placement. And I'm so glad that I kind of had a small sense of myself by the time I'd got there, because if that had been my first foster home, there's no way I'd be sat here talking to you. It wouldn't have gone well. And that foster home just involved all the abuses that you can imagine. But my saving grace in that home was that I had a neighbour who had 5 children. The 5 children weren't my saving grace, but I babysat for them 5 hours a night for £1 an hour, which gave me £25 by Saturday morning. And I would take my youngest sister, her and I, and that was our escape. I would take her to the local shopping centre, and we would just stay at that shopping centre all day. We'd maybe go to the cinema or something. And that was my kind of experience of, when you have your own money, you have the freedom to make choices about what you do, and you can create another environment for yourself.
That's incredible.
I mean,
what
I
a
have
lesson.
So many questions just of that. But so are you in touch with any of those foster
Oh,
parents?
yes, Mummy Olive, yes, 100%. So we send each other cards and letters. She's getting older and older.
So
and
which one's Mummy Olive?
Mummy Olive is my first foster parent,
okay, yeah. Okay.
who is on a pedestal. No one could ever knock her off. And actually, I went back to visit her when I had my first child, and it was so interesting to watch her change. I've got a Benji too, Benjamin. I know you've
really?
got a Benji.
Oh, yeah.
And I just watched her take my child, and I was emotional just watching it, because you're just seeing, wow, now you've got my child and I was your child. And anyway, and she was just changing his nappy on her lap, like bam, 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 done. Because this woman had fostered like 80 children or something, and there were pictures of me and my sister and some of the other Nigerian children she had fostered. And I said to her in this kind of realization that I hardly had any pictures from my childhood, which actually gave me a really full-on experience when I became pregnant, because I realized I don't have any memory. I don't know what I don't have any memories. And my husband has a very close family. There's 4 children. When I first sat with them for dinner one night, they were telling each other stories. Oh, do you remember when? Do you remember when? Do you remember when? And I just had this light bulb moment of, that's why you don't remember, because you haven't had the same people telling you, do you remember when?
Yeah.
Do you remember when? So there are chunks of my childhood that I don't remember, some because of trauma, and the brain will protect you, and some just because I was the one that experienced it and no one else saw it necessarily. So it's kind of, it's gone. But I'm okay with that, to be honest.
Do you know why? Have you heard why Mummy Olive wasn't able to keep you? Beyond?
Yeah, because I just know that the financial strain on my mum was just too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Wow.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely fine. Like I said at the beginning, I feel so fortunate that I was loved deeply in the first 7 years of my life, that was just no question for me.
Yeah.
And that your childhood, does that play a big part in, or did that play a big part in what you then decided to do for a living, which is what you do now, as far as being a coach?
Oh gosh, it's such an interesting thing, isn't it? Steve Jobs had said it's when you look back, you know. So I had many careers. I arrived with my last set of foster parents, Sue and Russell. I arrived with them with 2 plastic bags of my belongings on their doorstep when I was 13 years old. Now with a social worker, because before that, my sister and I had been made homeless by that horrible fostered situation. And the foster mum just kind of disappeared on us, and we just got home one day from school and there was a note that just said, you have been evicted. And we had no idea where she was.
God.
And I can't remember what we did. I actually can't remember what we did, but we went to school the next day, I think in the same uniform, or it had been a non-uniform day. So the deputy headmistress said, why have you not changed? And then we said, we got home and like she wasn't there and we didn't know what to do. And we slept on a friend's floor. And then my sister and I were separated and we stayed on different friends' floors. Very thankful to those parents that said, that allowed us to do that. And then we went into kind of the foster care system. And I arrived at Sue and Russell's doorstep with my social worker with 2 plastic bags of my belongings. And the next morning, Sue took me out shopping to Marks and Spencer's, which is like my favourite place ever. And whenever I go back to England now, the first place I go is the food hall in Marks and Spencer's. And I just buy more food than is necessary for anyone. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's like your Willy Wonka's
yeah,
chocolate
it is
factory.
like the chocolate factory. I'm like, they've done this with quinoa. It's amazing.
The walls are scratch and sniff.
They probably are now.
Oh, mould again.
No, never in Marks and
Not
Spencer's.
Marks and
Don't.
Spencer's.
Never.
Sorry, it's blasphemy. What am I saying?
What are you saying? And so Sue said to me, we need to buy you things. You don't have anything. And one of those things was underwear. And I share this story often when I'm speaking on stage, that she said to me, do you want the multicoloured or the pink knickers? And I didn't really hear her. And then she asked me again and I didn't really hear. And then she sort of was more forceful. Kemi, I'm asking you a question. Do you want the multicoloured knickers or the pink ones? And I just remember it felt like Marks and Spencer's had slowed down. But I realised that she was asking me to choose. And that was my first experience in my life of anyone asking me to choose anything for myself.
Wow.
And I didn't know the word empowerment then, but that was the feeling I had of like, this is what power feels like. To be able to choose for
And
oneself.
how old, you might have said, how old were you then?
I was about 12 or 13 then.
Right.
Yeah. And she was a careers teacher. So suddenly it was like, I was in Willy Wonka's sweet shop in terms of choice. I was like, I'll choose all the things. I want all the things. And she said, what do you want to do for work? I was like, I want to be a fashion designer because my birth father was a very famous Nigerian textile designer. I was like, I want to be a fashion designer. I want to work with kids. I want to go to drama school. I want to be a chef. And she was like, well, look, acting and I want to be an artist and fashion designer. So she said all of those 3 can be quite hard industries to get into. So why not get a trade first? And I loved baking, and it's interesting, isn't it, with COVID and how many people turned to baking.
Yeah.
So when I got to Sue and Russell's, my final set of foster parents, and I was obsessed. My teenage friends were going out doing things and I just wanted to be at home baking. And Sue and I would bake and I'd choose the recipes and had piles of books in the bathroom. I'd be on probably too much information, but anyway.
No. I've always thought like there are a few jobs and a few professions that I have like weird fantasies about doing because I'm in the work that I've always done, which has been in film and TV or radio. It's all very up in the air and unpredictable. Like you can be on top of the world one day and then it all just gets pulled from beneath you. There's not a lot of consistency, I guess, sometimes. And so sometimes I have these weird fantasies of like being like a baker is one of them. And then the other weird one I have, this is just me sharing now.
I'm waiting.
Is can't believe I'm here and I'm saying this. Is to run a regional post office.
Oh, I understand.
Do you know
what I mean? Is that the community?
Yes.
Wow.
It's to your because
so specific.
Because I spend a lot of my time in regional Victoria, and the post office I go to is I'm always going there to pick up parcels that have been sent.
Yeah.
And there's just I really love the idea of the consistency. You're seeing the same people come in and out. You're helping them.
You're of service to them. You create relationships with them.
Yeah. Every parcels have a place. There's
everyone's name.
Task orientated. Yeah. I mean, anyway,
what they're buying.
Yeah. So it's sort of like my long-term
aspiration.
Yeah.
Aspirational post
plan.
office. Yeah.
So anyway, it's a bit about me.
No, that's awesome.
I'm picturing your local postman right now, post office person going, oh, he's got his eyes on my job.
Exactly.
Or Australia Post are going to give you a call. They're recruiting. They need help.
I'm up for it.
Yeah.
I am up for it.
Do you think, I know this probably isn't the point of the podcast, but do you think there was something in also once you arrived with what were their names again?
Sue and Russell.
Sue and Russell.
Yeah.
That you wanted to, you said everyone else was going out and doing things where you just wanted to stay home and do. Was there something in that kind of safety there and the being able to have structure and routine?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I am a very structured, rhythmical, routine person for that reason because I didn't have any of that
Yeah.
So for me, and I've had to be mindful of that as well. I remember when I first bought my flat in London, I had a friend staying with me and she had a pair of shoes that she'd left in the lounge and I moved them. She said, why have you moved my shoes? I said, 'cause it's a lounge. Shoes don't belong in the lounge. And she goes, but I live here too. Yeah. And I realised in that moment that in me, I was trying to control my environment, that made me feel safe.
Yeah.
And I needed to put in place the things that need to be put in place, and then I felt okay. And it's interesting, I think, how our experiences reveal themselves to us over time. There's nothing we do by accident. Every behaviour we have has come from something. So I've had to be very, I've got kids now, teenagers now, and I've had to be very mindful of that, of like, we all do live in the house together. I have my study where I work, which is exactly how I'd need and want it to be. But all the other spaces, I'm kind of more open to it just being whatever it is.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. It's that feeling of like wanting to control your space, but also your routine. And then if something ruins your routine or gets in the way of what you wanted to do, it can be really stressful or annoying.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing as well, because I've practiced meditation and yoga for 25 years now, and I would say that is the balance for me. So that actually now I can be in the space of actually none of it's real and it is impermanent, and you need that sense of comfort, but also if it gets taken away, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's actually okay.
Yeah.
So with COVID, it was so interesting with lockdown that I just knew, I was like, I know how to do this. I know how to survive.
Been training my whole life for it.
That's right. That's right. And I'm an introvert as well. So I love some of the memes that were going around that time. Introverts check in on your extrovert friends. They're not going well.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah. You were one of those people who were like, when the lockdowns got announced, you had to pretend you were upset. No, we have to stay at home again.
Oh, no, that's a shame. But I remember that my struggle in lockdown was having everyone around all the time. Like, we're a family of 4 and I love my family dearly, obviously, but I struggled with having people around all the time.
Yeah, because you're an introvert.
Yeah, and kind of more had to make myself like, leave the room now, go and see the family, go and interact.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the background. It's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, no problem.
So you've written a book called Power. I guess I'd love to know. I mean, this is like where I sort of forgot for a minute that we're in the Academy of Imperfection and you're kind of lecturing us. I was just just loving your story so much. But what are your? I think we've got a feeling of why you do the work that you do. What is it that you are teaching people most at the moment? What are people coming to you most for?
It's such an interesting thing, and I think I want to start with kind of sharing what a coach is, or the role of a coach, because it is different than the role of a therapist, although therapists can be trained as coaches and coaches can be trained as therapists. And it's also different than being a consultant. So I see my role as a coach is that I will ask an individual or a team, where are you now? And for them to get really honest with where they are, what's working and what is not working. And sometimes we don't have the space to be honest with ourselves about that.
And when you say teams, do you mean that could be like a working team?
Yeah, an organisational team. Yeah.
And you work with families as well?
No, I don't actually. I don't work with families. So I work with individuals or I work with organisations.
Right. Okay,
yeah. And then I ask them, where do you want to be? And they'll have an idea of where that is. And once again, I think a lot of us don't take the time to actually work out, is this the life I want to be living? What's working? What isn't working?
Or we just accept shitty situation.
Yeah, and I have to say that I was very much raised to believe, until I read my first personal development book at 18, which was The Celestine Prophecy by James Redmond. Has anyone ever read it?
No.
It was a book of its time, let's put it like that. I'm not sure it would translate now, I'm not sure, but I read it and it was the first time that I was exposed to, you do have a say in how your life goes.
Yeah.
And you don't just have to put up with what you're given. And that you can chart your course in a certain way. And so once I've asked them, where do you want to be? My role as a coach is to work in the gap. So there's where we are and where we want to be. And the way that I do that is to ask questions and to mirror back what I'm hearing and to share stories. It is not my role as a coach to give advice. And the reason I don't do that is because giving advice can disempower people unless they have asked for it. So I've been a coach now for nearly 10 years and I have given advice maybe 3 times, and each time I've asked my client, do I have your permission to give you some advice on what I have just heard? And it's because we've been working together long enough that I kind of know them enough to be able to say that. And they've always said yes, and I've given that advice. I think we've all been given unsolicited advice from family and friends. And what happens for the giver of the advice is that we have this kind of ego state of you just need to do what I tell you to do and then life is going to be fine because that worked for me.
Yeah.
And then it leaves the person that receives the advice thinking, well, if I don't do that, then somehow I'm failing, that I have failed. And the reality is that none of us know what it's like to be in somebody else's life unless they actually tell us what it's like. And my job, obviously, as a coach, that maybe the biggest role is to listen deeply.
Fascinating.
Because not many of us have that person in our life who their role is just to listen to us. Because at some point, I think you start to feel a bit like, oh, I feel really bad. All they do is listen to me talk.
Yep.
And so I think that's what a great thing to have.
And we're also familiar with people giving unsolicited advice.
Yeah.
Like it's
It comes from a place of care, but that's what people will go to straight away.
It absolutely comes from a place of pure intention and care. But I remember when I used to be a helper, and I don't use that. I don't help anyone. I support people. I don't help anyone. I remember when I used to be a helper, though, that, I would literally find myself going, can't believe she just doesn't do the thing that I told her to do, then everything will be fine. Which is so yucky for them and yucky for me as well. It kind of creates this really weird dynamic in a relationship where you're waiting for them to do the thing that you think they should be doing. And if they're not doing it, where does that leave them in your eyes?
Yeah, suddenly, and they just feel like a failure.
Yeah, and they just feel like a failure.
And then I failed again.
And I failed again.
Yeah.
And generally what then happens is that person will not come to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're embarrassed and ashamed.
Yeah. And because they couldn't do the thing that you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
There's so many things that I've done. I'm just realizing, I've done that wrong.
No friends left.
Too much advice.
That's what we call in coaching feedback.
Yeah.
So if you have no friends left, but we all do it. That's the thing. We all do it. We want to, and as I say, we want to help. And I think that disempowers us. Most of us don't want to be helped. We want to be supported. I mean, obviously, there are crises going on right now in Australia with the floods. People want help. There's no doubt about that. They want help.
Yeah.
But if we're going about our normal lives and we're not in a crisis state, I think we like the idea that our friends and our family are walking alongside us as opposed to them somehow pulling us along or pushing us in a direction that they think we should be going.
Oh, I was just going to say, after going to see this brilliant psychologist for so long, I started to feel like the most important thing of it was that she understood me. And just being heard and understood. And that was almost enough for me to go, I can deal with this.
Yeah.
I don't need her to tell me what to do. I just want someone else to understand what it's like.
Yeah. That's it's a gift to be listened to. It's why I, as a coach, have my own coach, because I know how powerful it is for someone to just listen to you.
Wow.
And so what are some of the main principles that you end up sort of, is there a common theme that comes through for people when they when you're their coach? Are there things that you find yourself saying to people that you think, gosh, everyone needs to, I mean, obviously you feel like you've written a book, but is there stuff where you go, everyone needs to hear this stuff. This is what people need to know.
Well, I would say collectively, because I mainly work with females, collectively, and the reason I've written the book Power, A Woman's Guide to Living and Leading Without Apology, is that many women apologize for being here. And I know that we have opportunities as women now that our mothers and grandmothers never had, and yet our internal dialogues about our worthiness for those opportunities do not match the external circumstances. And so for me, what I have found is that, I work with CEOs and I work with mums at home and I work with women that do both things, their parents and their CEOs, and I work with entrepreneurs. And there's this common theme around owning our space and not apologizing for being there. And not using language. I had worked with one CEO in tech who obviously knew what she was talking about, would always say, I think. And I said to her in one session, do you know what you're talking about? And she was like, what do you mean? And I said, because you're constantly saying you think, but I assume that you know. And she said, I do know. And I said, let's get curious. Where does that language come from? And she said, because I knew as a woman in tech that I would need to diminish myself in my language to get to where I am now. But I now realize in the role that I have, I do not want the women coming up behind me to diminish themselves in their language. So then that was our work together for her, just, very, very small shifts in how she spoke. So she started saying, in my opinion, in my experience, I know, I believe, and took out I think, unless she was actually thinking.
Unless it was a proper guess.
Unless it was actually a proper guess. But there were so many things that she knew that she wasn't willing to own. So I would say that is the common theme, giving ourselves permission to be in the rooms that we want to be in.
And do you reckon there's in your experience, there's a consistent reason why women feel like that, or is it sort of different depending on their experience in life?
Oh, there's only one word that comes to mind, which is patriarchy,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest.
Yep.
That's a really important thing to talk about
Yeah.
now with three men
Yeah,
in the room and
yeah.
men listening.
Yeah.
Really important.
And, you know, and I say that, and I'm aware of me saying that some listeners will go, oh, here we go. Don't know, I've just done a man's voice. Oh, here we go again, bloody patriarchy.
I think I do.
Yeah. Because that is the inner voice. I remember my husband said to me when we got together, I said to him, I need to let you know I'm kind of a 1950s housewife. You know, I was an actor when we met, and I left acting because it wasn't the thing that I wanted to be doing in the end. And so he'd met me kind of coming out of this acting and kind of the experience I'd had in England and people knowing me. I said, I'm kind of a 1950s housewife. Like, you're going to have to shake me up sometimes. But then he realised, because his mum had been at home for 14 years, and when I started thinking, actually, I've been at home with my kids, it's been great, but now I'm off, he realised, oh, gosh, I realised I kind of was liking you being at home when I got home. And he had to look at his inner patriarchy and what that looked like. And I feel very grateful that I married a man that's willing to look at that stuff, you know.
Yeah.
But I believe that the patriarchy doesn't work for men either anymore. That's the thing. It also has men in boxes that they are very restricted by and oppressed by. I sent out a text when I was writing this book to just friends and colleagues from ages of 15 to 55 and asked them, what does your internalized patriarchy sound like? Because in some ways we know what the external system looks like.
Mm-hmm.
It's men that get to have the power. It's men that get to do certain things, and women, we must be very grateful for anything that we're allowed to do. But the internalized patriarchy list that came back was, I need to be validated by a man. I must be thin. I'm only worthy if a man tells me that I am. Someone was told recently in work, don't be too emotional as a female, you'll never get the promotion. Someone else was told as a photographer, this is a man's world. The only way you're going to get what you want is to give what women give to men. You know, like, it's just there consistently. So then she didn't become a photographer for years because she thought, I'm not willing to do that. So then kind of her career started much later than she had wanted it to. So, you know, we have this inner patriarchal dialogues, all of us, men and women, and the power comes from taking the time to work out what they are and owning them. And after I'd sent out that text message, one of my friends actually said at the end, my list is so long and it makes me so sad. And I actually called her and we actually cried a bit together, and then we got really angry, and then we just laughed at how ridiculous it all was.
Mm-hmm.
Just how it's made up,
Yeah.
you know. I was interviewed the other day and someone said, if you could change one thing in history, what would it be? And I sort of thought, well, in some ways kind of Nazi Germany comes to mind, or slavery, or I said, but actually I would like to change the moment that it was decided that women were less than men and that women chose to believe it.
Yeah. Bad moment.
Bad moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I cannot say how the world would be different if that hadn't have happened, but it would have been.
Oh, God.
But it would have, if you go back to that moment, whenever it was so long
Yeah.
ago,
Yeah.
to look at it and go, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And
Yeah.
like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you'd laugh at it.
Yeah.
Go, why? Because you're taller?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my entire life. And then you'd laugh at it, and then
And that would be it. And then, you know, if you can add race into that as well, the moment it was decided that certain races were superior over others. And the thing is as well is that I think there was a form of female power that was so scary that women were burnt at the stake for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, so at some point, you know, when we look back in time, the Egyptian gods, women were goddesses and were held in high regard. But at some point, it was decided this power is too much and we need to harness it in.
It was one of those things that women have that really cool trick of being able to have children.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
To be able to birth life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just on that, I was going to say
Yeah.
maybe, if anything, it could maybe be a bit the other way, because men can't. That's the most incredible thing to have a baby. Maybe it should be a little bit the other way. That women a little bit more.
Yeah,
because
100%.
they can do something that
men
goodness
can't do.
me. And it's actually.
And it
having a
takes
baby.
something. Yeah.
And I've seen it happen twice.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do it. I mean, obviously, physically.
You reckon you couldn't do it? Oh, mate, I reckon you're selling yourself short. Seriously.
Listen to your internal dialogue.
You put your mind to it.
That is internalized patriarchy right there.
It is. Mate, your self-esteem's low. You got to think about this. You can do it. Put your mind to it.
We couldn't put up with that pain. We just couldn't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's So if anything, it should probably be the other way.
And I think what we're striving for and what I write in the book is, the idea of power in the way that I write about it is that we need to redefine what it is. So the Oxford Dictionary definition of power is the ability or capacity to do something or act in a particular way. That is it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't say power equals this kind of person power equals, just says if you have the ability to do something or act in a particular way, you have power. I redefine it by breaking power into a power acronym. So it's presence, ownership, wisdom, equality, and responsibility. And in the equality section, I look at, yes, we all have a role to play in global inequality, in whatever way that resonates for us. No one can do all the things. That just leads to overwhelm and burnout. But the things that we're pulled to contribute to, that we must do that. But also there's a level of equality within each of us that we need to own as well. And for me as a Black woman who has navigated mainly white spaces all of my life, being raised to be told that I was less than and that I should be grateful because I had white parents, like that I should always just be so grateful for that privilege, and that I felt this sense of never belonging anywhere. For me to stand in spaces and know that I am equal to the three of you, for example, how do you identify? What's your heritage? Do you identify as a white man or a person of colour or on the spot?
I'm Jewish.
Yep.
So I guess like growing up in not a super religious household at all, but definitely having grandparents who did care about going to synagogue for the holidays, and I had a bar mitzvah. So I probably, even though Judaism is not a big part of my life now, and what it hasn't really been for most of my life. I think as I get older, I identify more as that in a weird way than being a man. And I think it's just because I think it explains more about who I am than the fact that I'm a man.
Yeah.
I haven't really thought too deeply about that, but I do. Like, I actually just said to my girlfriend literally just yesterday, because my whole life I've avoided watching films or documentaries about World War II.
Right. Yep.
It's something that's too heavy or confronting, or I don't know. And it's like, it's directly connected to my grandparents. And yesterday I was like, I want to start watching those documentaries. Like I want to, there's something in me clearly that I feel like I'll learn a lot about myself the more I delve into that world. And so I think it's interesting you asked that, because I actually think more and more I identify as that.
Because I think I remember listening to the episode where you shared about hiding. I think it was the vulnerability tea house, and you shared about hiding that, and it made me think about I would be approached by Nigerian people asking me why I didn't speak Yoruba, which is my family's tribal language, and the shame that I didn't know that it was okay that I couldn't speak it. That my experiences of being brought up in Kent and not being brought up with my birth parents, of course I wouldn't know. But the pressure on me, and I was like, oh my God, there's something wrong. I should know. So I really resonated with that, with that idea. And I talk in the book that I hold my English birth and my English citizenship, and I hold my Nigerian citizenship equally. And that I will define my identity in a way that I decide to, not in a way that other people think that I should, because that's where power comes from. There are so many assumptions that are kind of put onto me. People are like, oh yeah, you must love hip hop. And I'm like, no, I don't. Most of it is misogynistic, and actually I'd rather listen to Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers singing Island in a Stream. Like, like that's just my reality. That's what I love. And the person
asking is like, hey, that can't be right.
No, that can't be right. No.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, and one of my podcast episodes is called Belonging, and it's about, because I sing, and I used to sing these kind of musicals and white music and, white music in inverted commas. And I would have people saying, why don't you sing jazz? Why don't you? And I had this internal thing of, I will never like jazz. Because I was like, I will not like the thing that you think I should like.
Yeah.
This is so...
It took me a long time, and I now love it, actually. I actually really, especially the female singers, like I love jazz, but it was my way of saying, I didn't know this consciously then, but looking back, it was obviously my way of saying, you will not define me. You will not define what music I get to listen to because of the colour of my skin.
Mentioning belonging, I was thinking about asking you about belonging just before you mentioned it, because I don't know. I mean, I am conscious of bringing this back to what your book is about and what you do, but belonging, and I certainly don't want to make this about me at all, but since we're talking about me being Jewish, that was going to an Anglican school. Being Jewish was very strange, so I just hid it. I didn't tell anyone, and it was sort of like a weird shame and embarrassment that I had. But when I went to Israel a couple of years ago, I got completely taken by surprise how much just being there felt like, like I didn't have the culture shock that I would often have going to a really different culture. There was something very powerful about it, especially being at the Wailing Wall.
Yep.
Completely caught me by surprise.
Yeah.
And it was quite emotional. And like even being in the taxi from the airport into Tel Aviv, the taxi driver was just sort of like, wasn't saying much. And people I'd spoken to who had been to Israel who were Jewish in the past said, once they know you're Jewish, they'll love you.
Yeah.
And I sort of knew I had that ace up my sleeve. And I was just sort of like smugly sitting in the front seat next to the taxi driver. And he was just a bit gruff and he was asking, where are you from? And I said, I'm from, Australia. I said, but, and I sort of like, big pregnant pause. I'm Jewish. So.
But that actually does lead to the book, because I talk about in the principle of ownership. When with my last foster parent, Sue and Russell was working, he actually had a placement in Nigeria, and we went to Nigeria, and I was scared because I had been told Nigeria was a bad place, and I was lucky to not be there.
Yeah.
And I had been there at some point in my childhood at school. I know I was, because my birth mother showed me my report cards from there, but I have no memory of it. And so I go back as an 18-year-old, and I share this story in the book. I step off of the plane and I just see this wall of Nigerian women just in their power. And I don't know what's going on in their internal dialogues. They're obviously waiting for friends. Some are chatting. Some are in, full Nigerian dress and Kara fabric. Some are in Western clothes. Some are in a mixture of the both, because Nigerians do that really well, mixing up a bit of the Western and a little bit of Nigerian. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is where I come from.
Oh, it's the best.
And I spent a lot of years walking into rooms thinking, you must be nice. No one must fear you. You cannot be the angry black woman. Don't have an opinion. Don't speak. And I remember looking at these women thinking, my God, people think I'm intimidating. If they saw these women, they think these women are intimidating. They're just standing in their power. There's nothing intimidating about them. And that was actually when I started to call myself a black woman. Because up until then, I was wary of calling myself that because of the negativity around that.
And your experience.
And my experience. And so even at school and around belonging, I'd be called all these names, and one of them was Blackjack. Blackjack, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't know then, but now I was trying to hold on to my identity in some way to define myself for myself. And I would say to the people in the playground, my name's not Jack and I'm not black. So if you're going to call me anything, call me Brown Kemi. Like a very, unintelligent way, but just trying to you can't define me. I haven't even defined myself yet, but I know my name's not Jack. And I know that I didn't identify as black then. And it was only when I got older that I kind of realized, no, there is something in owning my blackness and saying I am a black woman with all that comes with.
That's just brilliant. I mean, that scene is so powerful.
It was, yeah.
It's, yeah. Yeah. It's when I said that to the taxi driver in the car, it's pretty different. I'd say more of a stereotypical Jewish response, not to stereotype, but I said that and his eyes widened and he said, oh, what are you doing in Australia? This is your home. Yeah. This is your home. He was so confused why I wasn't living in Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you, very quickly, did you, when we go to Sri Lanka and telling people in taxis that we're Sri Lankan, half Sri Lankan, how does
that? I was just thinking, I don't think that's something I've delved into enough, thinking about our history with the connection to Sri Lanka. But don't on a massive ace up the sleeve, I can't wait to tell them that my dad's Sri Lankan.
But I certainly, when we go there, I feel it. I just think, it's funny, Dad's only been back there once, but I feel like
that connection.
Actually,
massive.
Yeah.
True. And I think there's a warmth, there's just something about the way Sri Lankan people are that just automatically reminds me of Granny and being a child around within our family.
I've got Sri Lankan eyes and legs though, and I feel that when I meet them.
Oh, really?
I definitely came from here.
But I feel like as well, I feel like it can go the other way. Like I remember when I was acting, I went to Florence. I became very good friends with my makeup artist and we went to Florence together and we landed in Florence and I just went, I've been here before.
Right.
It was, and I've never had that in any other place.
You just felt that connection to it.
Just felt a connection to it.
Yeah.
Just like I have been here before. And I didn't start going, I was obviously a medieval, something. I had no idea. But that connection and that belonging to a place. And ultimately, for me, this kind of dance between the white world and the black world. And then when I did eventually, as a young teenager, I was acting and I was at drama school and I had to go and do like a little bit part in a music video. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be around other black people, and I got on the train up to London. I was like, okay, because people kept telling me when you're with the black people, they're your people. I was like, okay. And I remember getting there and there was dance and choreography and I had to sort of walk through and I had one line. And I remember saying something to the director or the choreographer and a couple of the other actors or dancers said something and I didn't know what it was, but I just suddenly had this feeling like, I think they're talking about me.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on when we broke, I went over, we were kind of in the green room, everyone was chatting and I said something and one of them just said, you sound just like a coconut. And I didn't know what a coconut was at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what that meant. And someone said, yeah, you look black, but you're actually white, aren't you? So then I had this sense of, so I don't belong here either.
Mm.
Oh.
So there was all that expectation that these were my people. This is where I was going to belong. This was it. And on the train on the way home, I just had this sense of, so you don't belong in the white world and you don't belong in the black world. Your only other option, I think about it now in terms of power, your power now comes from belonging to yourself. So navigate the world as Kemi and that will bring a sense of belonging, which it has,
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, how do you define your belonging now?
I belong to myself first.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I have practices to make sure that is so important to me. And that's why the first power principle is presence.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder whether it would be, I hate to bring it back to the Academy of Imperfection because I'm just loving just free-flowing conversation. But since you mentioned the acronym of power, I wonder whether it would be worth going through each P to R.
Yep.
If you like.
Yes.
If that's, I think that would be a good thing
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, great.
I'm so interested in the practical stuff. How do people listen and go, right, I need to own my story more and to feel my own power. Where do I start?
So presence is really important because, presence is the ability to be present to oneself and to others. And if we're not present to what is working and not working in our lives or how we're feeling or how other people are feeling, we miss connection. We miss connection to ourselves and we miss connection to others. So I share what are the practices that make me present to myself are my journaling, my meditation and my yoga. And it was interesting when I was writing the book because my editor would say, you need to write down because it needs to, give people, how long do you meditate? What do you journal? And I just said no, because that sets people up to think that they're losers if they can't do that.
If they're not doing 8 pages a day.
So I'm not going to write the time I get up or how many journal pages I write, because I think a lot of self-help, especially for women, is about you just need to do it this way and then you'll be fine.
Yeah.
So then there's a lot of money made on women feeling like they're broken, they need to be fixed and they just need to follow this next person.
Yeah.
So I just sort of give a rough idea in the book, but presence, and I also talk about gardening. So that's the other thing. So I'm a big gardener. And when I'm present in nature and knowing that nature is something bigger than me, and to see beauty, I am obsessed with the beauty in nature, and I seek it out and I give myself the time to find it every single day. And it's something that I share a lot with other people. And a client said to me yesterday, in working with you, I have become more aware of the beauty around me, because she was very much in the kind of my power comes from doing. And I very much believe that our power comes from being with ourselves, being with other people, being in nature and being present to what is going on.
Yep, love it.
I wonder if you'd be able to talk about beauty just for a bit, because I find that a really interesting topic, because I feel like beauty and having beauty in our lives, I think, is sort of misunderstood or treated as like an indulgence that we don't need, but it's good to have, but it's an unnecessary part of our life.
Yeah, 100%. So for me, one thing that became really clear for me in COVID, and this is where art has just been through the ages, from the moment that we arrived, however we got here, there are many different ways that are believed, there's always been art. And there's always been storytelling, and there has always been beauty. And in COVID, I knew that I needed to have a lot of flowers around me.
Mm-hmm.
I adore flowers anyway, and as I sort of was saying to Josh and Ryan beforehand, that I've started flower farming. That's kind of my next passion. And I just decided, and there was the inner voice was, this is very indulgent. But I was like, I know my mental health, I called it my weekly mental health order.
Mm-hmm.
That I would make sure there was hardly any room on my desk for my laptop. And I just sort of said to my accountant, just let you know, there will be a few receipts coming through.
A work expense.
Yeah, exactly. They are on my desk, so surely I can claim tax on them. And I would look forward to that, because you know what it's like in lockdown, every day, same day, and I could see the flowers and I could see the beauty and I could see them changing and their impermanence and the colour and the individuality, and it just gave me what I needed. So for me, beauty is individual. It's for different people. I don't think it's an indulgence. I think it's part of mental health. You know, if we all lived in grey concrete boxes, I don't think that would work for most people.
But I think that's great, because it's like people, I think there is a sort of, maybe shame's too strong of a word, but like an element of like guilt maybe.
Guilt.
Around like wanting beauty in your life.
Yeah.
But I love how you've put that.
Yeah. I think there probably is shame for people too. I think, and that actually probably leads into the second principle of ownership.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll just share a story that's just come to mind now, just in terms of the story. So ownership is around owning the stories that we have lived, the stories that we have been told, and the stories that we have created and made up, and working out which of these are true, what serves me and what no longer serves me, and kind of a light story on this. But it was a big moment for me. As an endurance runner, you know, I need to fuel myself, and I really try to fuel myself for my running. And I remember getting home one day, I'd ridden the children to school on a Christiana bike, so that when they were quite young, so they're the Danish bikes where the kids sit in the box at the front.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd ride from Brunswick to Abbotsford, so that was like 6K there, 6K back. I was doing Bikram yoga and I was running, right?
Wow.
So I needed to fuel my body.
Sounds like my day. Don't know if I appreciate the laugh. But go on. Point taken.
And I remember sitting there. It's because I heard, as you know, I listened to the podcast, and I'd heard the episode where Hugh was talking about running, and you were saying about joining a running group, but you didn't want to do the running part.
Yes.
That was where my laughter came from.
Appreciate that.
And I remember getting home and eating a banana, right? And I was like, okay. And I was like, oh, I really want another banana. Oh, no, can't have another banana. Can't have another banana. That's greedy. You only have one banana. And I started to think, what is that? Those 8 bananas I'm looking at, I bought them. They're my bananas. I'm an adult. But I grew up with you have one piece of fruit. And I literally felt like it was a rebellious act. I picked up that second banana.
Yeah.
And I ate it. And in that moment, I was like, this is the story changed.
I love it.
So, you know, it's not necessarily the big life-changing things that I realized you only have one piece of fruit because that's a luxury. So then suddenly I'm in a space where I can eat as much. And I think, I'll be honest, I think I ate 4, but it was a big day. That was a lot of, cardio. It was a revolution in my house.
That's like the equivalent of someone going out and like graffitiing a train. So I'm going to have 4 bananas.
Yeah. And it did. It felt like that. It felt like, right, this is my, and that's me owning my story. This is a story that doesn't serve me because what I'm doing, I need to fuel myself. I can have as many bananas as I want.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make me greedy. It doesn't make me any of those things. It just means I'm hungry.
That is a life-changing anecdote for me, because Josh and I, growing up as kids,
right,
we had, when we got juice or milk, there was a little, like there was a mark halfway up the cup, and we never put it above that little halfway mark. That was like, and so now whenever I put, even as an adult, no one else is home, I'm really thirsty, I want juice, I only do half a cup.
There you go.
And I've always gone, that's over. I get stressed about it.
Yeah,
and I've never,
there you go.
I've never even questioned it. I've always gone, oh God, I've done more than half a glass.
So now you know you can have the same amount of juice.
I bought it.
But you can put 4 bananas in that. You can
then go graffiti a train.
With all that fuel. Yeah, exactly. With all that glucose, you can just go for it. So ownership is about owning all of the stories. So, you know, going back from my stories, like owning my identity as a Black woman, owning the music that I love, owning the people that I want to spend time. Like I really, really just want to spend time with people that are doing good in the world, and people that are up for growth and conversation and connecting with people. I didn't know that. I grew up in some very negative situations. One of my foster families was very negative. Everything was negative. There was gossip. It was just a dark space to live. And I'm grateful to that foster mum because she taught me how I didn't want to be. You know, living that story made me realize I don't want to be someone that talks about my friends once they've walked out of the room. I found it very confusing as a child. I'd be like, but I thought she was your friend and now you're saying all these horrible things about her. There was scarcity all the time. The language was always, there's not enough. And people that have wealth or anything are evil and bad and wrong. And so you just take on these stories. You just take on these stories all the time.
That's a great way to frame negative experiences as growth.
Yeah, well, I think it can be. I'm the same, as a business owner, whenever I have a bad customer experience, I don't go on and moan and whine about it. I'm just like, awesome. How fantastic. That's how you don't look after a customer.
Yeah.
Just a reminder. That's how not to do it.
Reframing that. Yeah. I'm struck by how they also so closely relate to each other. Like you need to have the presence to notice the banana.
It's so true. Yeah. You do. And I was sat in this kind of just on my own. You need to have the presence to be in tune with your body. And then once you're present to who you are, what's working, what's not working, you start looking at your stories, which is the ownership, which leads on to wisdom. That we all have an innate wisdom within us, but most of us, it's trained out from a very early age. And my husband and I decided that we would not do stranger danger with our children. Controversial for some people, but I just knew they will know, or I want them to at least try to know. And I remember when my youngest at one point, we were getting on a train and they ran on the train and they're a thumb sucker. I sucked my thumb till I was 16, another part of my comfort things, not in public. Just in the quiet of my own bedroom.
You looked directly at me when you said that, as if you knew I was going to judge you on the public bit. You don't do it in public though, do you?
Do you, Kemi? Surely not. I tried it again, I think in COVID. I just having a day and I was like, I wonder.
Wow.
It still works.
Yeah, I was really interested. I wonder if it still works.
Nah, not for you.
Right now, that's a time that's gone. Don't need that anymore. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Getting on the train, my youngest, and they just sidled up to this young guy, thumb in mouth, leaned up against them on the train. And this guy turned to me and said, "Oh, I miss all of my young siblings back home so much. This is so lovely." And they just kind of chatted for a half hour of the train ride. And I think we all know that statistically it's not the strangers on the train that do horrible things to children. It's the person you let into your home. And that was my experience. It was the person that was known and all of those things. And so for me, it was like I wanted my children to trust their wisdom and trust if the tree was too high for them to climb, that they would know, that if the swing was going too fast, that they would know. I was one of those parents that, my child would fall off the swing and I'd just stay. I'd just look at them and see what happened. And what happened generally if the parent doesn't get up to save them, to help, they just kind of, all children when they fall look up at the parent to see what the parent's going to do.
Yeah, and depending on the reaction.
Yeah, depends on the child.
We might be the opposite in that regard.
You can save yourself a lot of time, Hugh. Take a book.
I know. I know what you're doing is right, and I teach people that. But when it comes to it,
because actually, you do have those. And even I have teenagers now, and you still feel that kind of innate thing of wanting to. But I just always wanted to raise independent children who understood that their value in the world came from who they were, and I wanted them to have emotional intelligence. And that was it. That was my 3 criteria for being a parent, and to be present to them. So I travel for work. I want to travel. I love my travel. But when I'm with my children, I'm with my children. But when I'm not with them, I'm not with them. I'm not calling every 5 minutes. I've got a partner. I'm blessed to have a partner that, has his own relationship with his children, and they just kind of do their thing. And then when I come home, I'm present and I'm home.
How many pieces of fruit are your kids allowed?
God, that's ridiculous. They're teenagers. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's like, did I not go shop? Was the fruit bowl not full yesterday?
Yeah. So are they up to 4 bananas? Or
I think they're way past that.
Yeah, they're 5 or 6 a day.
I think for them it's more the grapes. It's maybe a kilo each a day.
Wow.
And though there's a kilo of grapes on the floor, and they put bunches of grapes in the freezer because that's cool, like frozen grapes until they're on the floor, and then they thaw on the floor. And you slip on them.
Yeah,
but anyway,
is that a done thing? Grapes in the freezer?
It is.
Yeah.
Try it. Let me know.
My Benji loves it.
Wow. Oh, really? Yeah.
Grapes
in the freezer. Yeah. So inner wisdom that we need to tap into that. A lot of us, we defer our power because we ask advice for everyone. We just ask advice from everyone and we don't trust ourselves to trust that we know the answer.
things instinctively.
So it's kind of like we are
Yeah,
capable of so much more than we
Yeah.
give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, and we don't
That's
need to
not-
outsource our lives to other people in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is not. It sort of relates to what you're talking about with your kids. But I remember hearing. I can't remember his name, but it's like a expert talking about self-defense and safety and
Right.
how he trains and works with a lot of women about their self-defense
Yep.
and does things like jiu-jitsu and stuff
Mhm.
like that. But one of his key things is that we know instinctively, and we always have since kids, we can read the situation.
Yeah.
We've got this wisdom inside
Yeah.
us that we can read when something's safe and when something isn't. But we get it trained out of us at
Yeah.
some point to
Yeah.
not listen
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah, 100%. We're told, don't cry, it doesn't hurt. All of this language, which I had to relearn as and I made sure that I told my youngest, my youngest now identifies as non-binary, but, but they were a girl, and my husband and I knew to never say, good girl, good girl, good girl, because it's taken me decades to stop being a good girl and to actually be a fully expressed woman. And it's this practicing, and I talk a lot in the book that the practice of power, that our power gets taken away from us. We give our power away as women as well because we know that's the best way in that situation. We know we have to defer or we need to withdraw. But then we also need to learn how to build it up. So the next one is equality, which I've kind of touched on. This idea that as individual human beings, we are equal to each other. And I find myself in incredible spaces where I spoke on Richard Branson's Necker Island around humanity at work. And, me and my brain imagined that Richard would come in, when I met him, that he'd come in on pink unicorns and, in a chariot with sparkles and rainbows. Little did I know that when I was serving myself pineapple from the breakfast table, that next to me was Richard Branson doing exactly the same thing. And we had this conversation and it was all great. And I talk about the conversation in the book, but I also facilitate for the Hunger Project. So I find myself in rural villages in Uganda with women and men and children who are bringing themselves out of poverty. So the Hunger Project, once again, is the coaching model. It's not we're going to help the brown people or the black people. It is they have their own innate wisdom. They are equal and they have the same intellectual inner resources as anyone else. They may not have the external material resources, but the hungry are the ones that know what they need to get themselves out of hunger, which we know in terms of lots of NGOs that have gone over and said, oh, we know what you need.
Yeah.
And then the wells have failed or the schools haven't been attended. And so, that equality within us is as important as the global equality. And then finally, it's responsibility, which is my favorite tool for growth and living on this planet. Because when we're responsible for our lives, that is when we have power. When we actually decide and when we realize, and I knew this from a very young age, that no one was coming to save me. I knew there was no prince coming. I read books. The princesses never looked like me. So there was definitely not a prince that was going to come for me. So I knew that I only could count on myself, which is good in terms of survival. But also part of my journey has had to be, no, actually you can also rely on others. My second book was The Gift of Asking. So kind of undoing the idea that my strength and my power comes from being a lone warrior and doing it on my own, that actually my power comes from being surrounded by incredible people. But I'm ultimately responsible for the actions that I choose to take and the actions I don't take. And I say in the book, every single action we take uses energy and has a consequence. And every single action that we don't take uses energy and has a consequence. We just have to decide what action is going to serve us.
Have you, just listening to this, have you had someone in mind? Is it yourself or you thinking as a parent or?
Oh, there's been a lot of parenting thoughts going on, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about myself.
Which is fine.
Classic me.
But that's what I mean, that's ultimately what this is about is for people to listen for themselves. And I think so often, when I speak at schools to teachers a lot, when I'm talking to teachers, I have to keep saying, hey, just keep yourself front of mind. This is for you.
Yeah.
I know you're thinking about your students, your kids at home.
Yeah.
But I feel like my mind kept wandering but I had to keep bringing it back to
you.
To me throughout that whole chat.
Yeah.
There is just so much in
Yeah.
there.
I'm just conscious of the amount of things I do in my life that are not that are not being present to what I need. And I'm missing the opportunity to experience life fully because I'm not listening to those little voices and those little needs and things that I need to be getting more out of every day and being able to do all those things.
Yeah, and I think that's, kind of as well what Ryan has said, this idea of, have the voice that is, oh, you really need to watch that butterfly. Like you see a butterfly, that's not, but I've got a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And what it takes to actually just go, no, I'm just going to watch the butterfly because I just heard that I need to and I want to do that.
Yeah, and when we were talking about the gardening thing before, and I know actually I'll say it for myself, but I think we've talked about this and you feel similar that I really love being out in the garden doing things. It's one of my favourite things to do and I just feel so happy.
Yeah.
But then I also realise that I'm often put too much emotional weight in the outcome. So if the garden fails, if the grass starts to fail, if the plants die, it's like it's me. Got
it. Yeah.
So finding that's what I wanted to ask you before we were chatting about gardening, before we turned the mics on. I wanted to ask you, and it's probably way too specific for this moment in the podcast, but your relationship with gardening and why you love it, and because things fail, it's not always all beauty.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, 100%. So my first foster parents were kitchen gardeners, so that's obviously that's just what I was surrounded by. And then when I arrived with Sue and Russell, they were making jam the day that I arrived on their doorstep. So they're big kitchen gardeners, so it felt like a kind of coming home again. So those kind of two bookends.
Hang on, how old is this jam?
It doesn't matter. It's got so much sugar in it.
Yeah, okay.
It's fine.
Just be wary.
It's not going to be an issue. Don't worry. It's full on white sugar. It is. Yeah. It's going to be fine for quite a long time.
It's obviously referring to our plum, vanilla and cardamom jam that we were gifted by Kemi.
A bit concerned about it now.
But no, it's interesting because I think that is the beauty of gardening, that things fail. I think it's a great metaphor for life. The same that I think running is a great metaphor for life, which you probably understand, that with gardening, you try and you can control what you can control. You can control putting the plant in and you can control watering it. But apart from that, that's kind of it.
You cannot control your hamstring tendon.
No, you cannot control your and you cannot control the aphid. I mean, and that's the thing about nature. So, with me recently, with experimenting with different roses and everything, the aphids come onto the roses like, oh my God, I've got to get rid of it. And it's like, well, no, I know the ladybirds will come. I just need to leave them because actually nature's got it sorted. This is actually all in control. It's bigger than me. It's actually, and can I trust and have the inner wisdom to know this is actually taken care of? I don't need to come in with my humanness and just actually leave nature to do it. And that's the beauty. The beauty is that the aphids come and then 2 weeks later, the ladybirds are going to come. And then when the ladybirds are going to come, then the birds are going to come. And that the beauty is that you become part of a cycle of something that is bigger than yourself. And if you're lucky, you get great tomatoes and flowers.
It's like
That's
a lovely.
beautiful.
It's like
that
a
is
lovely.
such a great metaphor.
It is a great metaphor for everything you've spoken about today. Can I ask you, just before we let you go, are you in touch with your birth parents still?
Yes, 100%. So my birth father passed away many, many years ago. So I didn't really have a relationship with him. He took me and my sister to Paris once and we just ate pain au chocolat and drinking chocolate. So I just thought, and we had the first Walkman in my school, which was currency as the only black person in school.
Do you remember what you were listening to?
Yeah, it was just nursery rhymes.
Oh, okay.
We had 10 nursery rhymes. That was it.
Wow. I had the times tables, so that's a little bit there's a level up.
There you go. Yeah. I probably should have had the times table,
right,
considering my maths is shocking. And my birth mother, I was talking to her just like last week. We had 2 calls actually last week. And it's so interesting because I was not raised with my birth mother, but my goodness, like when I speak to her, but because I've done my work around my relationship with her and just chose that I'm going to love my mother for everything she is and everything she isn't and not put any expectations on her. And when she first came to Australia, 2019, we spent 10 days together. I was 40 years old. It was the longest I'd ever spent with my mother on my own. And I remember being in a yoga class and we just got to the end of the yoga class. So my mum had arrived the night before. We'd gone out to a reggae club. I had to bring my mother home. She got off of the plane. We picked her up. She said, where are we going? I said, we are going to go and see Catch a Fire, who's an amazing New Zealand reggae band. We're going to go see Catch a Fire. We went, danced. My husband was like, babe, I think we've got to go home. I was like, Mummy's still dancing. Like, we're not going to get off the dance floor. The next morning, though, I got up to go to yoga. And at the end of yoga where you have Savasana, so you've moved your body and you're in deep breathing. And I remember just lying in Savasana and I suddenly realised there were these tears running down my eyes. And in that moment, I realised I don't need anything from her. I don't have any expectations of her. I just want to be present to this gift that I get to be with my mum for the first time in my life.
Incredible. Kemi, thank you so much for coming in and being on the Imperfects.
Oh, such a delight to be here. I'm just sad it's over, to be
Talk
honest.
about
Me too.
being present. I just felt
Oh,
that.
so
Yeah.
in it, yeah.
I
One of
was
the most
so
enjoyable
into that
conversations I've ever had.
In fact, I noticed a couple of times, I've never done it before, but sort of sat back and was just enjoying. You're a beautiful storyteller, and I felt so present for that whole chat. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So
Thank you.
I cannot wait to read your book, which only arrived yesterday, unfortunately, so I haven't read it. Got through 3/4. No, but it's called Power: A Woman's Guide to Living and Leading Without Apology.
But that doesn't mean it's just for women to read. I really feel like men need to read this as well.
I'm very happy for men to read it. And I'd love to hear from any men that read it, to hear what they've got in there. There's actually a letter that my husband wrote to me during the Black Lives Matter movement, even saying it's getting me a bit emotional, but it's a very powerful letter. I'm married to a white middle-class lawyer. So he ticks all of those boxes in some ways.
Yep.
So the relationship that we have had together, and we sort of joke about that he's taught me that I'm allowed to be in spaces, and I've taught him that not everyone wants to hear his voice.
How do you feel about that?
Well, we've been together for 20 years, so it's working.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kemi, thank
Yep.
you so much. It's so lovely to meet you.
Absolute pleasure to meet you all. Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Kemi.
If this episode has been triggering for you, we strongly recommend Lifeline on 131114. The Imperfects is hosted and co-produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Brian Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, edited by Andy Hall, filmed by Andy Poole and social mediated by George Martin. A special thanks to Dr. M for her expertise and guidance. We'd also like to thank the Resilience Project for their ongoing support. Our acknowledgement of country was delivered today by Jesse Motlock, and you can find Jesse's podcast, Deadly Discussions, on YouTube. Thanks for listening.